I have the pleasure and the privilege of working closely with Dr. Arnzen in the writing popular fiction program as well as in English literature. He is our horror writer extraordinaire. He's won roughly 450 Bram Stoker Awards. He writes in a multiplicity of formats, including fridge magnets.
Right.
Short stories, novels, poetry. And I think that's one of the things that makes him interesting in the Stoker world is he's won Stoker Awards for, I think, pretty much every kind of fiction that they have a Stoker Award for. If they do create a Stoker Award in fridge magnet, then he will win it.
Right.
He's a valuable and beloved member of the English cohort. And I'm excited to introduce him for his talk on masks.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Peeler. That was a great introduction. And I'm so happy to see all you guys here. A lot of familiar faces and unfamiliar black frames. but I'll trust that you're there on the other side. I actually have a PowerPoint for us today. So I'm going to try to open that up and use that for our talk. But before I even start, I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm very glad that Seton Hill is doing this series of pandemic talks. If this is your first time to one of these, take a look at Shine, look for the other ones that are coming up. They're usually on scientific topics. Today's topic is masks and messages, and it's going to be a merging of science and humanities. So be prepared for that. But I've been to a couple of these, and they're quite interesting. It's really a topical series, and you can learn some important things from it. So anyway, I originally proposed this just by the title, Masks and Messages. And as Dr. Peeler just made clear, I work mostly in horror fiction. So I was going to prepare a 1-hour lecture on, Jason and Michael Myers and, the Halloween masks of the world and how that kind of relates to COVID. Because, there is a fear factor involved with these masks. But as I started doing more research, I started taking it more seriously. And I'm going to talk about all sorts of things today with you if there's enough time. So let me get my screen up for you to see, and you can check out my PowerPoint as we talk. If you have questions, I guess, put them in the chat, and Dr. Peeler will catch those and raise them when it's pertinent. Okay, and I will hopefully have time for questions at the end and call and response as we go. So here we go. Let me share my screen with you. Okay. Boop, boop, boop. So here's the title screen, Masks and Messages. I want to start with a sober note before I get goofy. Hopefully you can see this. I saw this just yesterday on my Twitter feed. It was broadcast by the Daily Beast. I had a series of these slides about the number of deaths related to COVID. That if you were to calculate the total number, it would be more than the population of most big cities in America. So the US death toll surpassed Pittsburgh's population of 300,000 in December. So imagine the whole city of Pittsburgh gone. That's the number of people we have lost to COVID. Very sad. National Geographic also recently put a visualization out of this, because once we hit more than 500,000 deaths, that's a big significant number. And people are sharing kind of, how do you imagine such a thing? So National Geographic did this visual campaign. I pulled a couple of excerpts from that out to show you. But if anybody wants these slides after my talk, email me. I will gladly share them with you. But I'll just quickly read, if you can't see this. If we were to lose all US postal workers, that would be the number of people we've lost to COVID. COVID.
Can I ask you, can you make this, like, show the slideshow thing? Because it's a little small for us.
Well, it's going to be small that way too, but okay. Let's see where.
If you probably go to slideshow, and yeah.
Yeah, that's a little better.
Yep,
All right. Yeah, and losses to COVID are about 25% greater than the number of deaths we had in World War II. So this is a big cultural event. If measured in the skies, 500,000 is 100 times more than all the stars visible to the naked eye. So the next time you look up at the sky, think about that. Think about that. This morning I checked the statistics. The death toll was kind of morbid of me, but I wanted to find this out for you. So as of this morning at 8 a.m., there are 112.7 million cases of COVID worldwide, with a death toll of 2.49 million. In the United States, 28.8 million, with a death toll now at 515,000. In PA, almost a million cases, death toll 23,749. And in our county, there have been 666 deaths alone, in Westmoreland County alone. Now, statistically, that's a 97.39% recovery rate from COVID is, it sounds good. And that there's only a 2.61% death rate from COVID worldwide. That sounds like good numbers. But when you look at the number of deaths worldwide, you should be astounded and not consider COVID just a minor illness. This is a serious global pandemic. However, I did a little more research and found this nifty graph, which I hope you can see the far right side of. This is, I shouldn't have said nifty, because it's a graph of the daily number of deaths due to COVID in America. And it's starting to go down as we work our way into the spring, as you can probably see where the curve's down in the middle of the graph. But there's a marker, a vertical line that says today. And after that is the projected death toll. And as you can see, as it says at the bottom of the screen, if that's not cut off for you, they're projecting by June 1st that there'll be 378 deaths on that day. Could be much worse if certain, like if hospitals get overcrowded and things like that. But they're projecting that if we had masking, if everybody wore a mask, that would be reduced by roughly half. We have only, if I can use that word, 190 deaths on June 1st if people kept up their masking. Of course, that's just a projection, and in the future, it's a guess. But I wanted to call attention to that chart because it makes the point that wearing a mask can save lives. And this is something we've heard often over the past year, but it still bears repeating when you look at the numbers and think about the astounding devastation that this disease has caused, that it is a very minor inconvenience, but masks work. Why do they work? Well, I have to come. I would feel irresponsible if I didn't at least mention a few reasons why masks work. Basically, it prevents your respiratory droplets, your spit, your phlegm, your all the gross stuff that comes out of your lungs from getting into the air and possibly infecting other people. So that's called source control in the sciences. Most people think that masks offer personal protection, and it does, but to a lesser degree. The cloth masks will block some particulates from getting into you, but it is a mask is much better at preventing those droplets from getting out of you into the air in front of you and potentially infecting another person. Now, you might feel perfectly well and fine, but you could be what's called an asymptomatic or a pre-symptomatic carrier of COVID. Like you could have it and not know it, or you could be sick tomorrow when it suddenly hits you. So we never know if we're carrying this invisible agent and whether we might spread it. So wearing the mask is a safety precaution to prevent that from happening. We should be wearing it just in case we might have it, because the likely benefits outweigh any minor harm and inconvenience that might come from wearing it. And then there's scientific research that statistically shows that masks work. I've already shown you a graph. I'm not going to read to you all this, but any basic research out there will show you that wearing masks does have some impact on the spread of disease. And in some countries where they made masking mandatory, there have been right away, when COVID was first known about, the death rates were very, very low. In Taiwan, only 8 people died from COVID because they immediately made everybody wear a mask in that country. In South Korea, there's only been about 1,400 deaths for a similar reason. That's a lot. Any death is a bad thing, but masking really seems common sense to me that it could help save lives. And as it says at the bottom of the slide, it could actually help the economy and prevent lockdowns and do all sorts of things if people would just agree to do it. But they feel that it's very inconvenient. Masks have fallen prey to political tribalism, as it says here. And we all pretty much know about this, whether it's over the dinner table at home or from watching the news or just from being a member of society for the past year. I know you haven't left your house or your dorm room very much, but you already know that there's sort of this political divide about whether or not you should wear a mask. And most sensible people would agree this shouldn't exist. This is a scientific idea. It's really not a cultural idea for wearing the masks. As the editor for The Week magazine put it, yes, wearing a mask is annoying, but it's so much less annoying than wearing an oxygen mask in the ICU. So masks work, but they don't only function. And this is where the idea of messaging comes into play. A mask communicates as well as hides messages. And that's what I wanted to spend today talking with you guys about. I like this pretty picture of Dr. Fauci. He's wearing penguins, not necessarily the Pittsburgh Penguins or Penguin Publishing Penguins, but penguins in a kind of cheery mask that's above his more surgical masks. So he's doing what's called double masking. Okay, you can see the white mask underneath the penguins. This is the recommended masking method today for the common folk, that we wear 2 masks if we can't get our hands on the more the stronger N95 masks. Okay, but just as much as this double masking method works, I think it's interesting to look at the masks that people wear because every mask that people wear, particularly if it has a graphic on it or something like that, is a choice, right? It's a choice. I can't really see the chat. I think something's happening in the chat there. But, and I would just ask you to think about what motivates you to put on the mask that you wear when you go into public. Is it just functional? Is it just like a surgical mask that has no messaging on it? Is it something you bought from Etsy because it was cute and you thought it would match your wardrobe? I mean, there are all sorts of motivations for these masks, but you probably have a favorite mask that is most comfortable, but also kind of presents your face, or at least the lower half of it, to the world. And I want you to think about that. What are you trying to communicate with that choice? And perhaps, what are you trying to hide? I'll never forget when I read an article in Popular Culture Theory by John Fiske, where he talked about, it was an essay called The Jeaning of America, and he was talking about why people wear blue jeans, you know, Levi's, denim pants. And he made the point that Americans like to wear blue jeans because it makes them look like blue-collar workers, that whether they are or they are not. And it makes them look like the average American. Like you look like everybody else if you wear blue jeans, at least in the time that it was published. And then his thesis was that it's a cultural thing. That is, it represents our kind of economic class, but also that we wear jeans to hide. so that we don't stand out in contrast to other people. We affiliate with American tribes by wearing blue jeans, but we also kind of merge with the crowd, become one of the crowd by wearing something that most other people seem to wear. And that's related, I think, too, to what's going on when we wear masks. Okay. I guess I could take a question. Is there any questions coming up in the chat or anything, Nicole?
We're good. We're talking about, and I don't know if you get to this or want to get to this now, but we're discussing why people won't wear masks. Like, what do we think the motivations are there?
Well, that's a complicated one. Sometimes it's just like the political tribalism, right? That, perhaps I'm a Republican, so I'm going to stand with my party and not wear a mask, that kind of thing. Other times it's pure ignorance, of course. Someone just might think, well, it's not, I'm just going to the store. Right. And it could be a form of protest too, like true libertarianism, right? And, there are some articles that would say, like, this is a toxic masculinity, a performance of toxic masculinity, to kind of aggressively say, I'm tough. And, I don't have a slide of it, but I really wanted to have the whole video of Donald Trump walking up to the White House and kind of ceremoniously taking off his mask, saying, I'm cured. Yeah, you might have remembered that moment in the news if you were watching. Kind of posturing in this macho way that, you don't need a mask, you can fight it, that kind of thing. And this is dangerous belief system. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. Masks communicate. A mask filters not only the air, but also the channel of communication. It's a medium between the sender and the receiver in basic communication. And if you look at that little picture, this is the model, the two-way model of communication. The person on the left is encoding a message, something they want to communicate, something they want to say. They deliver that message by usually speaking it. Right now, I'm speaking to all of you through the channel of Zoom software, and it's reaching your eyeballs and your ears where you decode it. But if you have a bad internet connection, then it's a noisy form of communication. There's fuzz, maybe there's static, maybe it's a choppy image, right? Well, masks get in the way of this. Masks are a filter, like a screen between that blocks out the message, and the message has to go through that filter to reach the other side of the channel. So messages can get lost. Masks are a medium that filter messages, but masks also communicate. They signify and express meanings both overtly and covertly, and that's some of the business that I want to talk about today. Okay, they both block communication, but they also communicate things as well. This is pretty obvious, but it bears iteration. Physically, just physically, wearing a mask interferes with communication. It muffles your volume. It limits how you can project, how far you can project your voice. It degrades the frequency levels of speech, and I'll show you a slide about that a little later. But perhaps most noticeably, it blocks lip movements. So, if I just put my hand over my mouth, you can't really see what I'm saying. You can't read my lips. And if you're hearing impaired, you're used to depending on seeing a person's lips move to understand what they're saying. And this is what masking does. It turns us all into almost hearing impaired listeners. Young children, too, they focus on the mouth when older people are communicating with them. That's how we learn language, by watching the lips move, imitating how they move to mimic speech. And when we wear a mask, we're cutting that off to some degree. And it occludes or blocks facial expressions. So if somebody says something, you don't know if they're being serious or sarcastic because you can't see the little quirk in their lip, or if they're frowning or smiling, and it's okay. You can't tell. You have to kind of double interpret. You have to, a lot more gets put on the tone of their voice or their eyebrows or something like that. And this can lead to problems because we misread and misunderstand. This is Jim Varney, Vern. Might remember Ernest Goes to Camp or something like that. He actually had a very expressive face, and we communicate our emotions, many different emotions, through the ways that we express with our faces. We unconsciously signal how we actually feel. Like if you feel sick, you might go, right? And people can see that on your face. But also, sometimes we perform with our faces. We're all kind of actors in society. Life is just a stage and all that, right? And we lose half of our stage when our face is covered with a mask. All right. And so there's a lot of scientific studies going on about masking, but this picture is from one. Just looking at this, you can see that this actress is posing her face in different emotional states. Angry is the one on the left, disgusted, fearful, happy, neutral, and sad. Now, on the bottom, you can see her face covered with the mask. It is difficult to interpret the emotional expression when you can only judge based on the eyes and eyebrows. There's a little bit, there's some, you can get refined, kind of good, and get good at interpreting these things. But as you can see, expressive communication is blocked. This can lead to confusion and misreading of emotional signals. So for instance, if you look at her masked sad face, you might think she's actually angry as opposed to sad because you misinterpreted it. You didn't have the mouth area as a visual cue for interpreting her emotional state. And now, reading someone's face and trying to figure out how they feel is one thing. But as I suggested a minute ago, we colorize our speech by expressing our emotions through our face. We're always pantomiming meaning and the kind of tone or color of what our messages are through our facial features. We also kind of, in American culture, rely on smiling a lot. Like smiles imply a lot about energy level, health, happiness, kind of, they communicate it'll all be okay kind of vibe. Smiles do an awful lot, and we don't get to see them when we're all wearing masks. Now, I know you guys have all experienced this firsthand in your everyday life. I'm just trying to call attention to some of this so that you can think about it. Like, what can we do about it? How are we managing these issues in our everyday lives? I hope I'm not putting you guys to sleep. Just lecturing here. I don't like talk nonstop like this too often. I did want to throw out one caveat though, and that is that all the signals and cues I've been talking about for emotional reading, we recognize them intuitively, but they're also cultural constructs to a certain degree, right? Like we learn how to read each other's faces as children, growing up in our cultural situation. So if you grow up in mainland China with a family of Chinese people, your reading of facial expressions is going to be slightly different than growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because your parents and the adults in your life and others are all expressing culturally in a way that signals in the equivalent of a foreign language through their faces. And in our global society, this can lead to many conflicts where we assume someone's angry when really in their culture, the stoic look implies peace, happiness, contentment, taking time to size up the situation, not necessarily being angry or upset or mad, confused. So these are cultural constructs to a certain degree as well, which adds to the problem of miscommunication. So what are the solutions and workarounds? I bet you know some. I want to discuss a few that I plan to talk about, and then hear maybe if you've thought of or have other ways of communicating that enhance your ability to communicate clearly through when you're wearing a mask. Okay, this picture freaks me out a little bit. They're making masks with PVC windows in them, basically. They're clear mouth masks where you can see the person's lips moving, you can see them smile. Now, in a way, I guess that helps with the emotional expressions, right? But on the other hand, it's dehumanizing still because they look like robots or freaks or something. And secondly, these are not healthy. The plastic typically fogs up. You can see the spray of spittle and so forth. And if people aren't cleaning them regularly, it's not hygienic. The plastic also blocks the sound, so it increases the muffling problem. However, in some fields like speech therapy, in schools for the deaf, where lip reading is mandatory, they're turning to this as a solution. And maybe some of you are using face shields still on campus, despite the CDC's warnings that doesn't do much for you. This is one workaround. It's kind of a middling solution, I think. Here's a chart that shows like how your voice degrades depending on the type of mask you're wearing. And near the bottom is the PVC window. I don't know if you could see that. It's only worse kind is the plastic shield. Surgical mask actually is the one that has the best for voice projection and volume. Interesting. The N95 that's being talked about a lot lately is in the middle ground, followed by the cotton blend, which most of us use. There are all sorts of scientific studies like this that are happening right now with masks. It's really interesting. Again, if you showed up late, I can give you these slides afterwards if you want to email me. All of these slides have sources listed in the notes in PowerPoint. Here's a solution that's talked about in pop culture a lot. Smizing. I just like the word because it's a neologism, smizing. To smile with your eyes, okay? And apparently Tyra Banks coined this term in America's Top Model, the smize. And she even tried to monetize it by creating an app that teaches you how to smize, which is to smile with your eyes. The idea here is that when you have your mask on, like so, you can smile with your eyes over it. Okay, it's crinkling up your eyes in a certain way and kind of projecting, trying to beam a smile out of your eyeballs. There's a degree to which that works. All right, but it also can be very phony, and as you can see from these pictures, it's something artificial about it. But apparently, one article I read said that some healthcare workers actually were using the Smize app to train themselves for better bedside manner, so that they could smize over their masks, when they're talking to people who are dying of COVID. Another solution, I'm going to show you, I'm going to let it speak for itself because I found this kind of heartwarming and one of the best things I found in researching the topic. And that is a video of a project of artists to help the medical profession humanize the mask. Because wearing these kind of hygienic suits, these hazmat uniforms, like spacesuits, it's really dehumanizing. And, well, I'll just let this speak for itself. Hopefully the video will load and you can hear it.
I just had this vision with coronavirus, with COVID-19, that there would be people dying who were not able to connect with their loved ones, who were not able to have their family nearby, and who might not see a human face as their departure from this earth. And that just seemed not okay. I remembered a few years ago seeing a documentary that highlighted work by an artist, Mary Beth Heffernan.
The Ebola crisis was burning out of control in West Africa. And the thing that struck me about the suits was that the patients couldn't see the healthcare workers' faces, and that this exponentially added to the already terrifying nature of the disease. I thought, what little thing could punch above its weight with psychosocial benefit for the patient?
We know only a little bit about how important humans are to one another. That little piece of what we do know is what we're trying to leverage. A warm and competent provider is going to activate in you as the patient your body's own healing mechanisms. We wanted to make sure it wasn't an additional burden on doctors who are building a plane while flying it right now. I use an iPhone, I take a picture, I print it on stickers and hand it over to healthcare workers that I tell them to put the sticker on your heart because your care is coming from your heart. Anybody can do it. This is something you can do now.
Isn't that interesting? So I hope you could all hear that. Just having a picture of someone smiling on their own kind of uniform, on their heart, as she said, can make all the difference. It's such a little thing, and yet we get so caught up in the technocracy of everything that we do that we forget about the human side of what we're doing. It's efficient to wear the mask and the uniform and the hazmat suit because it's safe. But we forget to empathize with the patient and how they're seeing this. And I would just throw out there to ask you to think about, how are you engaging in potentially dehumanizing relationships in your COVID attire and regalia? And what can you do to humanize your relationship with, say, your students or your co-workers, or what it might be? Just something to think about. And maybe we can talk about that in a few minutes when we get to the Q&A portion of all this. I want to keep going forward here because there's so much more. So much more that we can talk about. So, all right, masks may block facial features. They might degrade our speech, lead to misunderstandings, and even dehumanize us, but they can also be used as a canvas for expression. And this is the side of the equation where masks communicate themselves. How so? Oh, wait, I see we've got some people in the waiting room. There we go. So implicitly, and this is me saying this based on several of the articles I read in preparation, that if you just by wearing a mask, you're communicating to the world to some degree that you're safe, that you're concerned about safety, right? That you're hygienic, that you don't want to transmit or contact disease, right? That makes you trustworthy, reliable. In other words, you're a civil person. You take responsibility in engaging with other people and understanding the impact that your actions and activities will have on other people. You have theory of mind, as the psychologists say. It also implies and signals that you're an educated person, that you know how to wear it properly, what mask to buy, all that other stuff. It signals that you know a thing or two about this. And finally, and perhaps the most important, it signals to others that you care about them. So that, you might not, it's that whole issue of wearing a mask doesn't necessarily protect you from the virus as much as it protects other people. That's signals. Wearing a mask in public signals that you care about other people. It might not show the degree to which you empathize with them, but it shows that you care. even so, it's still a source of fear if our culture continues to treat it as a negative behavior, or if the context remains unclear. So we shouldn't just hide behind our masks, but engage with other people, perhaps more than we normally would while wearing one. So one psychologist says, don't take one sign, such as a raised eyebrow, as your only cue for understanding what a person means. Consider the context, consider the speaker's culture. Take the time to ask for clarification rather than rushing to judgment, and be interactive. Yeah, okay. Like all forms of clothing, we need to remember that masks are inherently expressive, all right? They're personal objects. They can express emotions. This is a picture of me wearing a goofy mask somebody gave me. I threw it in my car as a backup mask in case I forgot to bring my mask with me. And so I was driving through a Dairy Queen drive-thru and put it on and saw myself in the rearview mirror and said, oh my God. So anyway, I took a picture of that one. That's how crazy that looks. On the right side are my 3 favorite masks. And earlier I asked you to consider, what is your favorite mask? Do you have a go-to mask that you like to wear when you're going out into society, perhaps on a fancier occasion than others? Do you have a mask you wear only with your friends if you're going to see, in an appropriately socially distanced way, your friends? Is there a mask you wear to campus? Do you wear something different around the house? I don't know. Just something to think about, because these things are personal and they're choices we make. Some scholars would call this self-fashioning, how we represent ourselves to the world as a kind of text to be read. We offer ourselves up to be read and interpreted by the clothing that we wear. We also affiliate with groups culturally. We're like tribe members. So like, I'm a horror writer. Wearing that goofy fang mask is perfectly acceptable among my friends. Some of you are starting to question who the hell I am right now. Okay. Masks have been appropriated by the fashion industry, who sees a big market here, okay? Because they provide us with attire that we can use to express ourselves artistically. And there's a lot of debate in the industry right now about how far should you go without exploiting the whole, pandemic. You don't want to just make money off of people dying and being diseased, but by the same token, you want to provide people a form of expression. So the high fashion industry is really interested with making masks that don't look like masks at all, with making masks that match as an accessory to other pieces of fashion that you might be wearing, perhaps even out of the same exact fabric as the woman on the right is wearing. And I think they're kind of cool. They're artsy expressions through masks. You have to wonder how safe some of these are, but they're kind of neat, right? I like it because it's not, they're almost like rebellious. Dressing this way is rebellious because you don't want to look like everyone else at all. And, everyday people, too, are expressing themselves through their masks. They're drawing them, they're painting them, they're buying downloadable materials, or they're going to the Michael's Craft store or whatever it is and buying paintable fabrics so that they can make their own masks. Here's a few from online that I thought were kind of nifty and cheeky and very expressive. It's a kind of folk art, which has its own powers. If you're an art history person, you understand the power of that. And people are getting really crazy with what they're doing with masks. They're making them interactive, like almost puppetry. The woman on the right has this mask where the lips open up to a smile when she opens her chin. The woman on the left here, her husband used a 3D printer to make this weird filtration mask that she wears in her nursing job. Fan culture is really using masks because masks are all over the movies, right? So we've got an Avenger mask, we've got an Alien mask, we've got a Friday the 13th mask, we've got a Hello Kitty mask, sports masks, and people are going to great lengths to do this. This is a kind of art form in and of itself. I hope they're being healthy with it. There's technology that's doing things with masks that is trying to solve the problem of how you communicate, like a mask that smiles when you smile through LED lights. You can use an app to like express emojis on your face. I think it's a little bit much. This is a Kickstarter project, but it's real, called the Jabber Mask. If you're interested in that, you might do a web search and see it in action. Turn your face into a blinking billboard. And I bet a lot of you already know this. The craft business is booming on Etsy. Look at this. Etsy has sold 12 million or $133 million worth of fabric face masks since the beginning of April, CNN Business said in May. So in 1 month. Wow. And hey, yeah, they're pretty cool. 2 of my favorites are from Etsy. So I hope they're still safe. I don't know. The rules keep changing. What time is it? Oh boy, it's 4:45. I better book through this. Do I have anything left? Yeah, I'll just quickly show you a couple things, all right, and then I'll open it up for questions. Obviously, consumer culture sees a market here, so there's a lot of branding happening. There's a website called Mask Club where you can subscribe and get a mask for a different pop culture icon every month. It's obviously been used in political speech as a form of political speech, so campaigning. I like the funny one about Fauci in 2020. That's kind of a joke one, but obviously you can use these things as like a walking advertisement. There's been a lot of sloganeering happening in Congress. So like Chuck Schumer has the Save Our Stages mask you may have seen in the past couple of weeks. And yes, Ted Cruz has one too. But likewise, everyday people can use masks as a form of activism because, fight fire with fire, why not? You can broadcast your beliefs. Black Lives Matter, wear a mask, it says so. Or you can be like Marjorie Taylor Greene and use it as a form of protest in this ironic wearing of a mask where she addressed Congress against wearing masks, wearing a mask that said censored on it. You're not censored if you can talk into a microphone before Congress. Matt Getz in the upper left wore a gas mask to try to mock Congress for having to wear mandatory masks. He was laughed out of the room for doing that, but it was a media stunt, it was a publicity stunt. And there's another guy, I forget who this is, but he wore this one that said, "I'm just wearing this mask so I won't get fined," which is a lie because he's double masking. So obviously he's in fear of dying. Liar. All right, so I'm going to stop that now and see what's on your mind. Any lessons or takeaways or thoughts that you want to share? Was there anything that came up in the chat, Dr. Peeler, that you want to pass along?
I know a lot of us, from the faculty perspective, were struck by the pictures and the doctors wearing their photos on them, and people were talking about putting their photos into their PowerPoints, which is a great idea.
Ooh, I like that. That is a great idea.
And I know I was complaining to my friends today, actually. This is very timely. I was complaining to my friends today about how like teaching it's not fun with this stuff. It's, you can't go full Dead Poet Society. It's the same content, but you can't be as expressive. You're stuck in position. But at the same time, while I was listening to your talk, I was thinking about what that says about my over-reliance on Dead Poet Society shenanigans and whether or not I need to work on my content if I'm relying on pacing and...
Well, my tactic is always to acknowledge the elephant in the room and perhaps even to use it creatively somehow. So like you could, as a class activity, have people actually make masks. You could, as a class activity, have people write on or reflect about their situation in the classroom live, like what it means to have these blockades these hurdles we have to jump over just to communicate with each other, and things like that. That's one way of approaching all this. I don't know. My favorite mask is this one. It says blah, blah, blah all over it. I bought this to teach with because I figure a lot of people think professors just talk blah, blah, blah when they lecture. And I want to kind of like be a little self-deprecating with that. I don't know. I mean, the mask can still be a focal point. It can draw attention to what you're saying. And maybe that's how we can embrace them.
Mike, thanks so much for your talk. I appreciated all the humor. I loved the picture of you in your mask where you went to the queen. That was terrifying. I would have immediately fled if I had been on the other side of the window. But I really liked the one of the slides where you had like the mask and the different facial expressions and thinking about how sometimes it is really difficult to interpret. And I was wondering, I had read an article, this was back in the summer, and it was kind of comparing across cultures the importance of facial expression in communication in different cultures. And they were actually specifically talking about how American culture is very smile-centric.
Yeah.
And that a lot of other cultures in different parts of the world, like it's something that they long have sort of found weird about us and sort of irritating. Like, you know, you'll hear Europeans talk about, oh, that American is smiling again, they look so stupid, or, you know, like that, those kinds of ideas. But this article was talking about how, especially in a lot of Asian cultures, but also in parts of Europe, and communication doesn't rely on the smile in the way that it does in American culture. Like it actually is a really important part of how we establish a connection with our audience. And anyway, so he was the author was sort of making an argument, I guess raising the question, wondering if maybe subconsciously that's a part of our cultural resistance to masking, in addition to, you know, toxic masculinity and a variety of other things. But anyway, I just wondered if you had run across other articles that kind of talked about that cultural comparison. I was really curious about that.
Yeah, I mentioned it in passing somewhere in here, that notion that perhaps like in Asian cultures, a stoic look is actually, you know, it doesn't mean that you're angry. Americans will interpret that as angry. But you're right, conversely, this article mentioned that Americans depend on high energy smiles and facial expressions and higher pitched voice projection. So I liked your point, though, that anti-masking or resistance to wearing masks might be predicated on people who feel like they're losing something, like a form of, they can't communicate in the American way because their bottom half of their face is covered up. You know, and it's probably, as with all things, it's probably motivated by fear of loss, just like we might fear losing our voice or losing, you know, being maimed or something like that, where we lose our communication skills. And, you know, a lot of what we do in life is dependent on communication skills, particularly for us as teachers and learners in school.
We have a great question in the chat. Any thought on how masks may actually make certain people extreme introverts, those who are very insecure about facial anatomy or appearance, etc., may like the masks better? And I've heard this a lot from my friends talking about their young kids, like their, especially teenage, like middle school teenage kids, where they're like, we never don't want to wear masks. We love masks. Like we don't have to worry about wearing makeup and we don't have to do that. Like they love it.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a shield and you can hide it behind it. I mean, we all like to hide. You know, we go home at night, hide in our bedroom. It's one of those things. You know, for me, my perception of younger people is that it's normalizing quickly, so that it's not that big a deal to put on a mask to go out to the store for someone under 18, but it is a big deal for people over 18, right? It's crusty old people, I guess, right? But obviously, if you're younger, you have less development. You've developed less reliance on your speech and vocabulary to earn power in culture, right? that's why teenagers just posture and pose a lot. And when you're older, you look back and you see this and you're like, yeah, you're really a scary kid or something, right? You know what I mean? It's like, it's posturing. And it's usually physical or using, slang or shortcut language that isn't really advanced. Whereas, the older you get, the more of your cultural power comes from being a good communicator, from having a developed vocabulary, from knowing how to read and write well. That's why people go to college, to learn how to communicate in their field, if not in general. And so hiding behind a mask, obviously, it plays right into that culture where words might not matter as much.
I thought it was really interesting. You made the point relatively early on about young kids, because I'm also interested in the effects of this on young kids. And I'm thinking about like how we learn basic skills of empathy and what facial expressions allow us to understand about other people, and how we use facial expressions to express ourselves, and how that's gone for kids in the preschool years. And I think that's critical, because preschool is the first time you're really kind of mandated to be around other kids, and through kindergarten and these things. And I'm wondering, like, there's no way to answer this question, of course, but I'm wondering about the long-term consequences of the disconnect between what we express and what we think we are expressing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like what we express physically with our faces, and what we think people are getting from our messages. So I'm thinking about young kids who very obviously cry, very obviously express fear.
Right.
And they're used to that information being automatically registered as, this child is,
Yeah. Well, Betsy, I'll have to look on in my archives, but I did read an essay, a scientific study of children, and with concern about them losing language development, because they fixate on the mouths earlier on, learning language. And then later it comes to the eyes and the face, and you start interpreting holistically. But the study suggested that the impact of masking actually wasn't too bad, because usually in the home place, it's masks off. So family members or whoever's guardian is actually talking and expressing and doing some of that human training, if you will, there. Rather than in public where everybody's got a mask. The thing I would throw out there, though, that I haven't seen mentioned anywhere, is that we learn also from popular culture. So like watching movies actually is a good thing here, because it's training people emotionally to look at the whole face, the whole body, body language in a way that is public, but it's, safe because it's through a screen. So I don't know, maybe Hollywood to the rescue here.
Sure, but I'm thinking still about like young children, and you're right, they get this information at home and maybe they watch these shows or whatever, but the majority of kids' shows are animated, which is not the same. And the interaction that they have with their peers, and in particular other teachers, like those peer relationships are really critical for like learning how other people are. Like the family is, so I don't know. It's food for thought.
It is.
Well, if they all turn out to be serial killers, Mike will have more fodder for his story.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, it's going to take a long time for this to manifest. We'll see what happens in 2040 when these kids are 20 years old. We'll see how well they're whatever consequences there. But it's a fantastic natural experiment. Like, how do we learn how to communicate? How do we learn to express when this much of our face is hidden?
Yeah.
Well, ironically, it might be hurting the most privileged children the most, right? In the sense that if you're living in a communal house with 4 generations, you're interacting with quite a few people. But if you're living with your in your single child mother and father kind of mansion with
Yeah.
only the servants coming and, you know, forced to wear full PPE or something to keep you safe. You're actually on the, you're actually struggling with that.
Well, I'm of the hopeful mind. I'm an optimist in a weird way. I think that what we're going through right now as a culture is actually training us to become more empathetic. That's just my hope, I guess. But I feel like we have to try harder to communicate. And so this inherently puts the burden of interpretation on us. And we kind of have to project and introject at the same time in a way that maybe we don't have to when we can just take kind of a look for granted or something like that. So I don't know. I mean, at least it's getting us to rethink our assumptions about certain things. You're right about, you know, the kind of blank slate child growing up in this culture. Hopefully it won't last very long, right? And hopefully they're not immersed in a culture where everybody's wearing a mask at all times, you know. That would be scary. I mean, I'm getting an idea for a potential story based on that. But are there any other comments or questions? I'd love to hear a couple more before we close out.
I have a comment. It's actually to all of you within the sound of my voice. If you do an assignment of the kind that Mike suggested, where you're having your class reflect on mask wearing or anything else that is pandemic specific, please collect and keep those papers in some format. Of course, get the students' permission, but pass it on to Bill Black in the archive. This mask wearing thing may disappear in another 6 months. You know, it's all part of our lives now, but future Setonians may well not have any sense of this unless we hand on to them some way of understanding our experience.
Love that. Yeah, archive it all.
There was one question in the chat. I'm not sure if you'll be able to, if you came across this in your research, Mike, but are we learning that those children, sorry. Does this make, so do masks make ASL very useful and more of an importance with hearing impaired individuals? So American Sign Language.
Yeah. I did not read anything about that per se, so I can't really report anything about it. But obviously, just like if you lose your sense of hearing, you might smell things more strongly. I think if you lose the sense of being able to lip read, that you might pay more attention to the symbolic systems of American Sign Language. I don't really know. Don't have proof for that. I sure would like to learn it though, because all I do is I feel like I'm mocking it all the time. Even when I just do things like, okay, whatever. Oh wait, okay, isn't that some QAnon?
It's now like a white supremacy symbol.
See?
They've taken all the good hand gestures.
I've got one for them, but okay.
I was going to just say something about ASL that really struck me this last week. So at my church, we're still meeting just fully online, and like one of the big losses is, and I feel like this in teaching too, is you can't simultaneously sing or do anything audio or simultaneously talk. You know how you have debates where you're crossing over each other? And so one of the worship leaders for Lent decided to teach us some sign language so that for like some of the prayers and reflections so that we could all be communicating together simultaneously. And I found that so powerful, like embracing ASL in this moment as having this capacity that our other linguistic systems don't have, particularly via Zoom. And so I liked like kind of riffing off Mike's, let's try to find optimistic ways to, you know, deal with this moment. But I found that really inspiring this week.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's something we've talked around a lot is just the idea that COVID's uncovered so many gaps in society, gaps in our own understandings of things, places where we may have been over-reliant on easier modes. So I got a lot from that, Mike. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks to everybody for coming. As I said at the very beginning, it's a very sad kind of period of time right now. You know, that statistic, you know, we've lost more than the population of the city of Pittsburgh to COVID already. That really brought it home for me. And that was in December. We're now over 500,000. There's 500,000 plus deaths due to COVID. That's quite a few. And it's a sad period of time, but masking seems to be the best thing we can do as ordinary citizens. So keep wearing that mask, but maybe think about it differently. You know, it's not just as a functional thing that you slap on your face. If you've only been wearing a surgical mask every day of your life since last April, go to Etsy.com. Do a little Google research. Look around on Amazon. There's some actually, you know, some good organizations that are making masks, that are using the money that they profit from to give to different charitable organizations. There's different groups of workers that are actually employed because of mask making, and obviously all the things related to messaging and communicating, like as a form of activism, as a form of positive affirmation, as an invitation to communicate. You can use your mask as an invitation to communicate, and if you do that, I think you're doing at least something. So I encourage you to do that as we move forward. And that's all, folks.
Great. Let's thank Mike for his your weird little silent clap that we can.
It's like an audio mask, I understand. But thank you all for coming. Have a good dinner. And maybe I'll see you soon on Zoom, if not in person.
Thank you.